When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Alright, hello YouTube, welcome back to the Grease Comms YouTube channel. Today's video, we are going to be talking about Arya 3 and continuing our Song of Ice and Fire reread, and specifically a Game of Thrones. So, I hope you guys are all excited. I think this is actually Arya's best chapter of the 3 that she's gotten so far. Kind of another longer one, about 12, 13 pages. So, again, sit back, enjoy the ride. And before we get into the actual chapter, if you guys would like to subscribe, like, and comment for more of this type of content, please do. And let's get into it. So Arya 3 starts on page 338, and just like we see in the image that I have on screen, we pick up with Arya chasing cats. She is particularly struggling with a one-eared black cat. Now this is not the cat we see in the show. In the books, it's very much like a beaten up cat that has a reputation, and in the show it's just some random cat. But Arya notes that she must be quiet as a shadow and light as a feather. Arya notes how the cat is looking at her with a wary and untrusting look. So again, a very common theme that we're going to see in this chapter is Arya is someone that repeats a lot of these lines, and it's something she's going to go forward for the rest of the series that Syrio has taught her. Things like I just brought up with quiet as a shadow is going to be one that we're going to see quite a lot, especially in this chapter, because Arya is doing quite a lot of like stealth or being quiet, getting away from people. And I think this is like this chapter that really foreshadows a lot of what we're going to see Arya in, not only Dance of the Dragons, but also in the future books like Winds of Winter, kind of this Assassin Creed type character for Arya. Arya notes how catching cats is hard. She had been scratched and bruised and just beaten up in general. Again, cats, depending on which kinds you go after, and when you're trying to catch them, they can be kind of violent. You know, it's not the same as like Ramsay's dogs, for instance. But again, it's not the best thing in the world to be doing. Now, she had gone to Syrio empty-handed a few times in the beginning with scratches, and he had told her that her enemies will give her worse than scratches, and he gave her Mirish fire, which burned her terribly, but it would work, and he would send her on her way. So that was kind of, again, some medicine for the scratches and all of that. Again, it's something that I think when we look at Ned and Ned kind of questioning Syrio's methods, it's something we're going to get to by the end of this chapter, is Ned's kind of like, okay, my daughter's just gone on kind of this really weird journey. I had half my guard out looking for you. Like, this has kind of gone too far type thing. This is kind of the stuff where there's just a difference, right? Over here in Westeros, people probably aren't using Mirish fire to fix wounds. So I think that's another one of those just differences we see in cultures like Essos and Westeros. At first, Arya had been too slow to even get the fat kitchen cat, but eventually she started getting better, and he was even getting a lot of cats that she kept bringing to Syrio. But this one cat in particular, this black one-eared cat, had eluded her. We also get metaphors to people, as Arya has been catching all types of cats, lazy ones, combed cats, and cats with claws like needles. So again, lazy cats you would kind of look at as just like people that maybe are like fat in this world, because there's kind of that idea that people in this world like Robert, who are very big, tend to be very lazy. If we look at Wyman Manderly's perception by like people, we know he's not actually lazy. He's actually doing a lot for like the Starks when they fall as a house. But that's kind of the perceived idea here. And so when you look at this, we kind of look at this as like Arya, how she may have targets in the future. She'll have lazy targets, or she'll have a combed cat, which is kind of reminds me a lot of like Lady, like Sansa's direwolf. But this is kind of the more rich upper class people that maybe Arya will have to take out in the future. And then we see cats with claws. This kind of reminds me of the kid Arya is actually going to kill towards the end of this book, where it's like he's kind of a poorer kid and he's in the streets. It kind of gives you more of like a cat that's very untrusting. So again, it's a lot of metaphors for people as a whole. I think that's something George, just nice little intro thing there for Arya and where she's going to go as a character. Now, lastly, we note that King's Landing is full of cats. Now, Arya doesn't know this, but we as the readers know that this is because of the Shivers disease during King Jaehaerys' reign, in which rats brought upon the disease. So again, it became very popular to get cats, because cats will take care of your rat problem, therefore hopefully eliminating the disease, because it's transferred by a rat. So again, that's all nice and good. We get a lot of cat stuff in the first page, but let's get on to page 339. So moving into page 339, the Gold Cloaks had told her that this is the one true king of the castle, and that once when Robert and Tywin were feasting, the cat had stolen a roast quail right out of his hand, which prompted Robert to laugh a ton. But this unnatural cat, again, leads me to have a couple questions here. Because is this cat in some way, shape, or form maybe being used by someone like Bloodraven? I think there's some interesting things that end up happening, because we see that because of what happens with Bloodraven and how this cat ends up leading Arya to go on this adventure where she could find some where she finds very crucial information, he just doesn't really take in that information well enough to Ned and all of that. But it does seem interesting that this cat like acts very unnaturally. Like, how, here's the even better question. How is this cat getting even into a position to steal food from Robert and Tywin with no one noticing? It could just be a really clever cat. I personally have had 2 cats in my life, and my first cat was really, really smart. It could like open doors, especially when it was like a little bit younger. But yeah, for my stream folks, that is not the cat I showed you on stream. That's not Sky. But yeah, so moving on. Again, a lot of questions with this cat on how intelligent it seems to be and some of the things it has been doing. Arya continues to chase this cat all throughout the castle until she finally thinks she has it. It is in a blank, windowless mass of stone, and she has it kind of cornered. Arya repeats her lessons in her head, and when she is 3 steps away from it, the cat tries to escape, but Arya is too quick. And that's something we're going to see a lot in this chapter, actually. This is not the first time we're going to see Arya use her quickness to either catch something or to avoid being caught. And Arya quickly blocks its escape and catches the cat, holding it in her chest. And this is while the cat is scratching at her leather jerkin, trying to get away. Again, very upset kitty. At this moment, she is interrupted by Tommen and Myrcella, who ask, what is he doing with that cat? Again, we have a common theme as well in this chapter where people mistake Arya as a he. And honestly, I don't exactly blame them, especially in this moment where it's like, Arya has been rolling around in dirt. She's scratched. She isn't dressing like a lady, especially when you look at like Myrcella, how she views that. She's kind of similar to maybe Sansa in that regard. So again, Arya is in a weird moment because you're sitting here, you look like a boy, you look beaten up like a commoner, and you have this cat that's in your like arms that's just trying to like scratch and bite you and stuff like that. It's a really weird scene. And Arya even notes this, right? She drops the cat in surprise, and we notice that Myrcella and Tommen have a septa and 2 guards with them. That will get us into page 340 to kind of see how this whole thing plays out. So moving into page 340, Myrcella then continues to look at her. And Myrcella even says that Arya is a ragged boy. Again, just Arya has this feel of being someone that at this point looks really probably disgusting at this point. And again, not really wearing womanly clothes. And Arya even like she thinks this. She's like, no wonder they don't recognize her. She's wearing worn clothing that is dirty, and she looks very beggar-like. And again, we're gonna see that as being a common theme, as well as when we get to the end of the chapter, when the 2 guards at the postern gate for the keep think she is a beggar. So again, all of this kind of makes sense. Now at this point, the septa asks, what is she doing with this cat, and how did she get in here, and all those types of questions. But Arya knows that she cannot respond. Whereas Arya, again, may not look like Arya to Tommen and Myrcella. If she speaks, she's going to give away her identity. Again, it's this common theme that we see with Arya, is that her survivability and her instincts when trying to survive are really high. And so she's not going to respond to this because she doesn't want her cover to be blown. Now, you might be thinking, well, why would Arya not want her cover to be blown here? Again, think about the way Arya has been taught. You know, she doesn't want to bring shame to House Stark. This is not the way she's been taught that women should behave. Now, granted, she doesn't, care about that. She still doesn't want to give off the perception that the Starks are kind of like beggars and are weird. So, and that alone, again, you're also going to see that if Ned found out about this, Mordain would probably punish her or something would happen there that make people angry. So Arya kind of just wants to ignore that whole problem. So Arya stays silent. The Septa then orders the guards to seize her. Again, it kind of looks like a beggar has broken in. Arya's not talking. It's just very suspect at this point. And Arya, again, starts to remember Sirio's quote, "Calm as water, quick as a snake." Again, more of those quotes that we get. She lets the guard approach, and then suddenly, as he's about to grab her arm, moves, dodging him to the left. She begins to run, avoiding them. But she runs directly into Tommen, knocking him to the ground and jumping over him. Septa is yelling now, but Arya keeps running, and eventually she pulls herself into a windowsill. And at this point, she's basically escaped any pursuit at this point. But again, now you've also knocked over the prince. You definitely don't want to get caught now if you're Arya. Now, Arya is highborn, so she, probably wouldn't, not much would probably happen out of this. But she still would get a scolding, so she's trying to avoid that at all costs. But this is going to lead us into page 341. Moving into page 341, Arya notes a serving woman sees her as she's climbing into this windowsill, but Arya continues running. She goes around long halls, stairs, and corners until she finds herself in a big cellar, or what she believes is a cellar. Arya at this point was out of breath and utterly lost, but she notes she must be quiet as a shadow. And again, I want to think about the quiet as a shadow part, and I kind of thought about this, and it kind of just came up in the back of my mind when I was reading this chapter. This kind of is a little bit of a foreshadow to Renly's death later on in the books, where it's just a quiet kind of wind enters the tent and then just kills Renly very silently, right? There's no sound really, and Renly dies there in Brienne's arms. So I really thought that was a nice little parallel to the idea of shadow being quiet, and I think that's a nice little foreshadow to what eventually is going to happen with kind of the Shadow Babies plot in the next book. I think this also is a nice nod to kind of the assassin that Arya is going to kind of become as she hears no pursuit and thinks how she always had bad dreams of getting lost in the Red Keep. Again, it's something where, Arya has moved to this big castle. And yes, again, Ned tells her it's not as big as Winterfell, like the Red Keep itself. But still, you're going to this big city. It's going to take a long time for you really to feel at home, to really know where everything is. It would be pretty easy to get lost, especially Arya. And this is something when you're younger, everything feels bigger to you. So it's easier to feel that way, in my opinion. For me, right, I went to Disney World when I was 5. And when I went back, when I was, I think, 18, I remembered everything being bigger than it was. So that's something I think that Arya is kind of experiencing, especially when you're even in a big city like King's Landing, and especially the Red Keep as well. And again, we see that these dreams usually reflect the characters' emotions, the struggle they're going through, or foreshadowing events to come. It's something that's very common with a character like Dany. So I wanted to point out, right, Arya feeling like she's lost in the Red Keep, like it's a maze. And there's also this point where she hears her father, yelling for her, but she can never really get to him. So what does this kind of mean? And I think there's a lot of things right now where Arya as a person kind of feels lost with who she is. Everyone has told her how she should be. And that's not what Arya wants to be. She's trying to work towards this water dancer, being a fighter, this tomboy type. So she kind of feels lost between, maybe what her mother, Septa Mordain, Sansa want her to be, and what she wants to be. And not only that, but she's still also trying to find a place in the world outside of what her role is, right? She's the younger daughter. She's, again, a younger child. She really is someone that is neglected, it feels like a little bit, especially with how we see Arya's character in the first chapter, where she really only feels like she's close to Jon. And again, it's a very sad and somber way to start her character. So again, I think that's reflected in the stream, where she feels alone and she feels lost. And the idea of Ned it's kind of foreshadowing to Ned's death. We're going to see a couple times in this where Ned's death is foreshadowed, where, again, she is always trying to, again, with Arya, we're going to see, like, with Ned, for instance, when she ends up meeting, Thoros and Beric, she thinks about trying to bring back Ned and bringing, Ned back without his head and all that. It's this idea that kind of Arya is having all this trauma, right? She has her list. She wants revenge. She wants to kill all these people. And that's not going to bring back, the people she's lost. Her mother, Robb, all these people, Ned, who she's lost. So, again, I think it's that idea that Ned stays with her, and it's part of her trauma as she goes forward as a character. Or not, or maybe even a different way you want to look at it for right now with this stream is that Arya feels like maybe she doesn't get the attention from Ned that she would like the approval of her father. Maybe that could be something else that she's chasing as well. Arya then notes how dark it is down here and begins to try and count to 10,000, and then she would be safe to come out. But she only just started counting when she notices the dragon skulls. And again, for Arya, she doesn't know the dragon skulls. She just thinks they're monsters because they have large teeth like swords and stuff like that. We as the reader know that they are dragons, but she does not. And again, she tries to remember Sirio's lessons, calm as the water. Now, something I really wanted to actually point out during this point as well, I know I'm kind of progressing the chapter a couple times, but I think there's just really interesting parts of this chapter for Arya specifically. This is really impressive that Arya genuinely was trying to count to 10,000, that she could do this at such a young age. And again, it shows how she's very intelligent, but just not in the ways of maybe like Sansa has her skills or the things Sansa is intelligent on. Again, it just shows Arya having skills that she's just better at. Like when we talked about, what Arya thought she was better than Sansa at, it was things like accounting, things like that. So I thought that was a nice little note. But that gets into page 342. So moving on, after remembering his teachings, her fear is gone. She begins touching the skulls and realizes that the monsters are dead. But all the same, it feels like the dragons are watching her, and she is unwanted. She even catches part of her clothes on one of the dragon's teeth and rips it. At this point, she is frightened of the monsters, even being dead, and this eerie feeling, and finds a door. She notes how this hallway is much darker than the previous one, and she again has to remember her teachings. A water dancer must see with all of her senses, and she even specifically notes that she was blind in this hallway. Wink, wink to stuff we are going to see in the future when Arya becomes blind and will have to use her other senses. This is a little bit of that foreshadowing and or training of her heightened senses for later on. She begins to feel the stone wall, and she travels alongside of it again, just following the wall, so she has kind of some sense of direction, because the idea here is if you follow the wall, eventually there's going to be an opening to where you would go down your next path. Eventually you would get out. Again, more great skills of survivability from Arya. And that gets us into page 343, where the chapter really starts to pick up. Just want to point out as we, go into this next page, it always bothered me that the show never got Illyrio's appearance right. He has this fantastic beard that's always talked about in the books, and then we see his character on the show, and it's like, well, that's not right. But yeah, moving on. Arya then notes that fear cuts deeper than swords, which I think is a great quote in general, because fear is something that can get you killed much easier than swords. If you are someone that is a great sword fighter, but you're fearful of maybe dying or losing, it inherently is going to make you worse. Usually, unless you a certain amount of fear is good, but if you're overtaken by that fear, it could lead to your death. And again, I think that's a common theme. I think this is probably the most common theme of Arya, especially in the first 3 books, where she's kind of on the run and she's in a lot of dangerous situations. This is like the big line for me for her, of fear cutting deeper than swords, because there's so many points where Arya is someone that's not going to be able to stand up to bigger people, just straight up sword fighting. But fear is something that, again, can hold her back, and a lot of the time she's able to overcome that. And at this point, she would not be afraid. Eventually, she comes to an opening. The wall her hand has been on stops. She then begins to hear voices and a light coming from beneath her, as she is on top of a 20-foot wall. Arya notes that are two men who cast shadows large as giants. Again, this goes back to the idea of Tyrion casting a very large shadow. Illyrio and Varys are people that, on the face value of it, do not appear as they're these big players of the Game of Thrones. But they are two people that are casting giant shadows. We see Illyrio playing his manipulations with Dany, Viserys, and even Young Griff, setting some of the conflicts forward for the next few books. We see Varys playing even more of a bigger role in King's Landing, trying to make that happen. And we see some of the actions he takes, whether it's destabilizing the Lannisters with like Kevin Lannister or things like that, or just informing on things to thwart plans. So, again, big significance there for these characters. The first man, which we know as Varys, Arya does not know that, but that is the first man when we talk about him, notes that Ned has already found one bastard, and the rest will come soon. The second man, being Illyrio, again, Arya does not know this, asks, what will he do? Arya then notes that the second man has an accent from the Free Cities, which she is correct on. Varys then says, who knows, the fools tried to kill his son and botched it, which is interesting because even Varys probably believes that this was the queen or Jaime. Again, we know that it's, well, we don't know. I think the common theory, the one I tend to believe, that's a whole nother video, but is that Joffrey tried to do it. I think the evidence points there pretty well. But either way, even if you don't believe it's Joffrey, maybe you believe it's Littlefinger or someone like that, that even Varys here doesn't really know who did it. But Varys notes that the Starks and Lannisters will be at each other's throats soon enough, whether we want it or not. Again, because Varys and Illyrio, at this point, right, I've had some confusing ideas here with their plan. It seems like a plan that doesn't make a whole lot of sense when you think about it. And something I'm going to talk about even further when we get into this conversation. But they more or less want the kingdoms to have a civil war as Dany is coming over. Because if the civil war happens too quickly, then the realm is more or less going to be united when Dany comes over. So again, it's all about timing. And again, this civil war happening at that exact moment, and also even thinking that Viserys or Dany is going to get over at that exact point. Again, really awkward plan in my opinion. Illyrio notes then that it will be too soon and that we are not ready, Varys. You must delay. He doesn't say Varys, but again, he must delay. Varys jokes saying, how should I do that? Be a wizard and stop time? And Illyrio responds, no less. At this point, the two are near enough to where Arya can see the two figures, and she herself kind of flattens herself and hides herself from view. And that gets us into page 344. So moving into page 344, Varys then asks, what would you have me do? And Arya notes that the man seems familiar, but she's not sure who he is. Again, Varys is wearing a costume. He is playing it very safe. He has a beard on. He's wearing like mail. He's dressing much more commonly, or maybe like a sellsword possibly would during this point. Illyrio then says, if one hand can die, why not another? Arya notes that she has never seen this man, but he is extremely fat and has a yellow forked beard. But he seemed to have some grace to him as he walks like a water dancer to Arya. Again, it could be the idea here that Illyrio kind of paints this idea of, I'm just a lazy fat guy that doesn't do anything, so don't take me too seriously. But at the same time, Illyrio walks very gracefully. He seems like there's more to him than that. Again, just I think nice descriptions that in so few pages we really kind of get a feel from, and again, in somebody else's point of view other than Dany's, of who Illyrio kind of is as a person. Varys then counters saying, this is different, right? Before, when Jon Arryn was killed, the circumstances allowed it for it to be more of like, oh yeah, it was just a sickness, right? Jon Arryn was a lot older, and people do die of the sickness all the time, right? It's not as unheard of. So suspicions wouldn't have arisen from like someone like Robert then. But think about it now. If all of a sudden Ned just up and died, like he got sick and died, it'd feel really weird. Ned is in his 30s at this point. He's not like old enough for that really to happen. And then if you also saw that with Jon Arryn just dying, it would be really suspicious. And I think Robert would even piece together, like, okay, someone poisoned him. Who was it? And then he would start kind of, it might lead Robert down that direction. So I think the idea here is that Illyrio just doesn't think that's an option, or Varys just knows that's not really an option without bringing up a lot of suspicion and or issues. Because the thing with Jon Arryn is, killing Jon Arryn, it made sense for a lot of people to have motive to do it. And also, it made sense as the cover story you could do really well. That's why Littlefinger's able to get away with it so easily. Arya is now only feet away from them, continuing to stay hidden. And Illyrio says, perhaps so, but we will need more time. Dany is with child, but the cow will not do anything until his child is born, as he notes how the Dothraki are savages. Which poses a question. Does Illyrio really believe that Drogo will suddenly sail over the sea, something they have never done because of this? It's a real interesting question here, because Illyrio seems to, in this moment, be banking his entire plan on that either the Dothraki are going to set sail for Viserys over the sea, something they will have never done, or that Dany is going to be able to convince Drogo to do it. Now, we know that is the case. Dany is able to do that. But how does Illyrio know that, right? Dany is not the same person that Illyrio, knew. So maybe it's like Jorah is informing them better on what the situation is, or what. I'm not sure, how Illyrio would be banking his entire plan on that. Now we know he has another plan. The other plan is that young Griff's supposed to come in afterwards, after Dany has kind of come in, or Viserys has come in and wreaked havoc. Viserys is supposed to come in as the savior, or young Griff is supposed to come in as the savior. Well, there's a lot of holes in that plan, right? I just don't. That's a big leap to conclude that, oh yeah, the Dothraki are actually going to cross the sea, type thing. Arya then hears Varys press something, and a rock face slides from the ceiling, blocking the path that they had come from. Varys then continues saying how the game has changed. Lysa and Stannis have taken leave, and Varys has had no information on them except that they are drawing swords to them. Loras has written to his father asking for Margaery to come to court, as Loras and Renly plan to marry her to Robert. So we kind of see the factions at this point starting to work themselves out even before the War of the Five Kings has started. We have the Vale doing their own thing. Nobody knows what's going on there. We have Stannis, who's drawing swords to him. We have the Renly-Tyrell alliance already forming. We see, again, the Starks are going to be against the Lannisters. So all of the factions have kind of already picked their sides. It's kind of just waiting for that penny to drop. Something needs to happen. And that's what Varys is really saying. There's just so many factors going on. I can't control all of that. And I think that makes a lot of sense, especially from Varys' point of view. How do you control everything? And especially when there's suspicions that Varys probably thinks that Stannis knows what the truth is. And narratively, Varys isn't going to say that, Joffrey, Tommen, and Myrcella are bastards in this chapter, because, again, then it would kind of break the whole story of the mystery of the whodunit type stuff. But, yeah, it is something that Varys has in the back of his mind that he has to know. But that will lead us to new page 345. Varys then also says he has no idea what Littlefinger's up to. Again, it kind of shows how well Littlefinger's playing the game, because even Varys has really no idea what he's doing and what he has done, what he hasn't done. So I think that's another interesting little point, and Littlefinger's is that wild card. Varys notes that the real threat is Ned. He has all the clues, and he'll figure out the truth soon, which Varys is correct on. And with that being said, Littlefinger has manipulated Catelyn into arresting Tyrion, which will set Tywin and Jaime off on the Starks, and the Tullys specifically. And this is something that Varys even notes, right? Because Tywin is going to want to get Tyrion back, which is going to set Tywin to invade the Riverlands. Jaime is kind of a hothead. Again, he is someone that likes Tyrion, so he's going to, again, take up arms as well. And Varys is completely right in all of this. Illyrio notes that Varys is a true juggler, and that he is a sorcerer, and he is asking him to perform his magic a little longer. Varys says he will do what he can, but he needs more gold and 50 more birds, to which Illyrio is shocked by how many he needs, and also questions if they could get them a little older. It would be easier than finding kids who know their letters, or that can be trained to do so. Varys says it is vital and much safer, and the two fade from the scene. Now again, this is important because it really establishes here that Varys has basically a bankroller, more or less. It shows that, yes, Varys is this powerful person, but he is still someone that needs backing and support from someone like Illyrio. That's how he's able to fund his spy network. It also kind of shows like how Varys is able to get all this information, that he's using children that, again, basically are being taught by Varys and or Illyrio and staying loyal to them. Because, again, you would assume a lot of these kids are kids that are beggars, that are homeless, that are just have no homes, right? Orphan boys that are going to be completely loyal to Varys because he's the one feeding them. He's the one clothing them. So again, all of that kind of makes sense. Arya, then having no other way out, follows the torch for some time, which felt like miles, and even gets to a point where she was half in water and she kept imagining Nymeria with her to give her strength, but eventually she makes it out into the night air. That gets us into page 346. Now, Arya kind of comes out of this sewer, kind of looking like the picture that I have up in the background, where she's messy, she's disgusting, and she stinks so badly that she decides to take off all of her clothes and swim in the water until she felt somewhat clean. A rider rode by and paid her no attention. Again, at this point, Arya looks like what we were just talking about with Varys, a homeless, orphaned, just beggar child. This is what Arya looks like. Of course, no one's going to pay any attention to her as well. She realized she was miles from the keep, but she could see it from anywhere around King's Landing. It was easy to spot, again, because it's kind of sitting on a hill, so it's not that hard to see. Eventually, she put her clothes back on and headed for the keep. When she gets there, the gate was closed. Again, it's dark. This makes sense. You don't want people randomly wandering into the keep, so the gates are shut. She goes then to the side postern gate, and initially the guards thought she was a beggar, telling her there would be no begging for food after hours. Arya tries to tell them that she lives here, and the men continue to disregard her. And I want to kind of defend the guards here. I know Arya kind of comes off as like the badass, witty character in this moment, but imagine you're a guard, you're on night duty, and this random girl that looks like a beggar comes up to you, and it's like, yeah, I live here. My dad's the hand of the king. What would you say? You'd be like, really, kid? You really want to try this right now? Another interesting point to note here is that because these guards didn't know that Arya was missing, it's interesting that like Ned's guards didn't really even say this information to the guards to look out for Arya. That I think is interesting. Now we know why, because Ned had told Arya, do not go outside of the gates, but it is interesting to note, right, that like Ned just really does not trust a lot of the guards or men around the city. And again, the men ask who Arya's father is, and Arya responds Ned, to which the men laugh even harder. And one of them even tries to hit her, which I thought was interesting. They didn't really do this in the show, but one of them actually tries to like hit her, or I guess grab her or something like that. But again, we see that Arya is too quick and tells them to go find Vayn Poole or Jory Cassell, and if you lay a hand on her, their heads will be on spikes. Now go, or do they need a good clout on the ear? One of Arya's better moments, and one of my favorites from book one. But something that I think is like interesting is like when Arya starts name dropping people, that's like these are not commonly known people, especially for like this beggar girl in King's Landing to be knowing some of these northern people that aren't really as like important. Again, it's got to be a big wake up call. You're sitting here going, oh shit. All right, we almost hit the hand's daughter. Definitely would have lost the hand. So they probably avoided some bad things happening. But again, it shows a lot about Arya's fiery personality, as well as her survivability and understanding her power in a given situation. Arya understands that she has power over these guards. Arya can use, again, her status to get into this, and she can use threats that are not hollow, right? She can use those threats to impact the way these guards will treat her. Arya is then taken to Ned, who she notes is alone in his solar, reading a very large book. That gets into page 347. Harwin then gives the report of what had happened, how Arya had been found, and Ned sends his guards away. Ned asks if Arya she realizes he had half his guard out looking for her, and that she is not to go outside of the gate. So again, all stuff we'd already talked about. We also learned that Mordain was in such fear she was praying for Arya, which I find very hard to believe. This is a very minor point in this chapter, but I wanted to point it out because I've kind of been doing this whole idea where I really like look at Mordain and how she's not a great teacher. She's not like a good role model. And the idea that Mordain, who's this character that actively bullies Arya, that's been established in, chapter 1 and a little bit in chapter 2 as well for Arya. To think she's praying out of fear, it's like, yeah, Mordain's praying out of fear and all this stuff because Ned's going to be pissed. If his daughter ends up dead in like a ditch, he's going to be sitting here going, oh, Mordain, aren't you the person supposed to be like kind of looking over my daughters and stuff, kind of filling in like that Catelyn role while we're at court, and now one of my daughters is in a ditch? Yeah, you're losing your job. So, I don't know. That's how I read the situation. But let me know if you think differently on Mordain. But I don't know. I am not a big fan of her. She's probably, as I've done my reread and like really honed in on Sansa's plot a lot more, Mordain has got to be like a top 15 character I just dislike in the story. Arya then says she did not go out the gates. She was in the dungeons and got lost, and that her way back was blocked by the monsters. Well, not them, but the two men. Ned is super confused by this, as anyone would be, right? Your daughter apparently was supposed to be chasing cats, but now she went to the dungeons, she went through the secret passageway, and then there were monsters and these two guys. It's a story that, like, Arya is throwing out there very quickly, and it's not going to make sense based upon what Arya is saying. And Arya continues saying, they said you had a book and a bastard, and if one hand could die, why not another? Arya thinks the bastard means Jon. And this is very interesting because this is when Ned pricks up his ears. At this point, he was very confused. He wasn't really interceding. But then Ned says, Jon? With a question mark. Again, the idea that someone maybe knows something about Jon and is talking about it in a secret way is something that makes Ned prick his ears up because of who Jon's parents are. Again, regardless of who you think they are. And then he asks what she is talking about and who said this. Arya tells him it was a fat guy with rings and a yellow beard, and another with steel cap and mail. They had been talking about how the wolf and lion were going to eat each other, and that he could not juggle it anymore. Arya says she thinks he was a wizard. So again, I want to just point this out from Ned's point of view, right? A lot of people might be thinking one of Ned's mistakes was he didn't really listen to Arya too much in this, and maybe if he had, he could have maybe picked out that this was maybe Varys, or listened to this information more, that he was kind of like, there's other people playing the game around him, which he already knew anyway. But Arya did not phrase this in the best way, right? She's like picking and choosing what people said and kind of putting it out of context so that Ned, it's like, your daughter is talking about wizards, monsters, secret passages in the castle. What is he supposed to think here? Now, let's continue. Arya again repeats how she got to where she was, except she leaves out the bit with Tommen. Again, this would get her into a lot of trouble because she knocked him over, so it makes perfect sense to leave that out of her little retelling of the story. So that gets us into page 348. So moving into page 348, Ned notes that she had quite the adventure, but that she said these men were talking of mummery and juggling. Ned then tells her that is because they were mummers. He has no idea why they were in the castle, but maybe Robert wanted the entertainment, which again, I think is a logical conclusion to come from this, just based on what Arya has told him. And Arya tries to say no, but Ned keeps going regardless. You should not be spying on people, and these lessons have gone too far. You are all scratched up, and again, she has all these scratches from the cats. She's doing really weird stuff. Ned had already thought about this earlier on, and that he says he will have a private word with Syrio. But at this moment, Ned is interrupted by Desmond, who says a black brother is here to see him and has an urgent message. Ned allows him to come in, as the Night's Watch is always welcome with him. Ned asks for his name, to which we find out this is Yoren. And Arya notes he's the same ugly, foul-smelling, and rough-looking Yoren that we've seen in past chapters with, like, Tyrion. All the same, Ned greets him with the same courtesy as usual. Something I also wanted to point out is, before we get a little further into this, is that Ned is, like, basically scolding Arya on eavesdropping on people and things like that. I wonder, what Ned would think of what Arya has become. I think that's something that is going to play in Arya's mind as we get further into Winds of Winter. I would love to kind of think about like Arya sitting there and going, when she meets Lady Stoneheart, if she does, thinking about what would my father think of this? Thinking back to this moment would be a really awesome little payoff for this little moment here. But let's continue. Yoren then notes that Arya must be his boy. He has the look. To which Arya says she is a girl. Now, again, I thought this did like bring up some questions. It's like Arya, again, is someone that still looks like a beggar. She hasn't changed. She hasn't, taken a bath, anything really. But there is the idea here. It's like, even at like a very close proximity, Arya is still being told that she's a boy, more or less. She looks like a boy. But then Ned says that like Arya looks like Lyanna, which is interesting because Lyanna was apparently like beautiful, or she was at least like pretty at the very least, because Robert Baratheon was enthralled by her, and probably for more reasons because she was kind of a tomboy as well. But it is interesting the way that we see that people continuously mistake Arya for a boy, and that's going to be a running theme of book 2 as well early on. Arya then starts bombarding Yoren with questions. So moving into page 349, I don't know if I've been messing up the 200 and 300. I just realized that when I was doing my notes for this like page. Sorry if I kind of screwed that up on the last page or whatnot. Yoren responds, no one sent me outside of Mormont to gather men and scum for the dungeons, from the dungeons for the wall, and to bow before Robert and the Hand to ask for his help. He says that Benjen and his blood both run black, so for Benjen he rode this way, nearly killing his horse to get here first, losing the others. And Ned is, again, confused by this, and then confused again for a second time in this chapter. And he says, others? Yoren says that the inn was full of free riders and sellsword scum, and some rode for King's Landing, but others to the Rock, where Tywin will inherently have already known. Again, and just the distance is much closer. Yoren then eyes Arya and says this is best talked about in private. Ned tells Arya they will continue their conversation about Syrio tomorrow. And Arya, before she leaves, asks if Jon and Benjen are okay. Yoren says he cannot attest to Benjen, but says that Jon was fine the last time he had seen him. Desmond then leads Arya out of the room, as Arya wishes it was Fat Tom. Because again, she could kind of manipulate Fat Tom and sit at the door so she could hear what was going on. But Desmond was not so easily fooled. She asks him, how many guards does Ned have here? And Desmond responds, 50. Arya then asks, you wouldn't let anyone kill him, would you? Again, this is fantastic foreshadowing to Ned's death later on, is that Arya kind of realizes, again, this is her survivability kicking in, that we don't really have a lot of guards here. And we're in a very dangerous situation with the Lannisters. The Lannisters have more men, and there's a lot of danger coming. Desmond laughs, saying to have no fear of that. Ned is guarded night and day. He will come to no harm. Arya responds that the Lannisters have more than 50 men, to which Desmond responds, 1 Northman is worth 10 Southern swords. And I just want to point out, if we do some math real quick, if there's more than 500 men, Desmond and the Northerners are kind of fucked. I'm just wanting to point that out at the end of the chapter, that even 50 men is not a lot, considering, like, the Lannisters, I don't know how many men, like, specifically they have here at this point, but they have way more than, like, the Starks do. I know the Golden Cloaks are, like, a very key factor to the plan of Ned, but it is interesting to, like, think about how many men really, that were Lannister men, like, from the Westerlands, were actually here in King's Landing. Would be an interesting little conversation to, like, think about here. Arya then asks at the very end of it, what if a wizard came after him? And Desmond says a wizard dies the same as any man once his head is off. Again, more foreshadowing to Ned getting his head cut off by the end of it. But thank you guys all for watching this video. I love this chapter for Arya. It does so much for her character, foreshadowing events to come. And also a lot of foreshadowing, a lot of build up towards the conflict that we are kind of heading towards in this book, and Ned's death by the end of it. So we're really going to start kickstarting it. When we get back with Ned, we're really going to start kickstarting the plot. Things are going to pick up. And yeah, I hope you guys all enjoyed. We're almost the halfway point of this book. So I hope you guys all enjoyed this one, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Bye, guys.